I hope you saw from that quite often we just think about the kind of logical arguments through a passage, and then that's what we give people. But if we think about the emotions that are happening in a passage, sometimes connecting with that helps people connect with the text on a whole different level, right? And so that's kind of what I would want you to kind of get from that. Okay, here's what I want to do this final little bit right here is just give you some things that might help you better connect with the emotions of people that are listening. And I'm going to give you a bunch of things real fast, and then when we go to groups, just pick out what do you think is the thing that you find most significant out of these different things, okay? So again, a bunch of things real fast. Before I do, something I find really interesting, I've mentioned this before, sometimes learning from movies. Movies are really interesting in how they convey emotion, right? What are some of the tricks that are used by a movie to convey emotion? Anybody? Music, that's the obvious thing, right? Music. And in fact, there's some movies recently where I've noticed this, where like the dialogue isn't even very good right now, but because the music starts playing, you're like, oh, that's really significant what he's saying, because the music has told me it's significant, right? Okay, anything else? What else?
Close-ups and also, yeah.
Yeah, close-ups. Yeah, it starts panning in because it's a significant moment right now, yeah?
The lighting and ambience.
Lighting and lens filters and things like that. Like they will color the footage just slightly because it affects how you feel, yeah. So lots of things all at play, even just in how these things work. And of course, they're shamelessly trying to grab hold of the emotions, right? But there's some interesting things that we can learn from what happens there. But there you go. Okay, so I've given you I've called it a top 12, and when I tried to reduce it to 10, it just didn't work. So here you go. First of all, thinking about our content, bring hope, okay? For example, sometimes in churches, I will talk about finances, and what I find is I've often had this experience. I'll go into a church and I'll talk about finances, and I'll say, you guys are amazing. Look at what you have done over this last year. And people will invariably come up to me and say, my years of hearing people talk about finances, nobody ever said anything positive, right? Okay, like that's sad that people would say that, but it really does happen. And so bring hope, okay? Secondly, connect people to a full range of emotions, such as wonder, hope, sorrow, etc. It's important that we draw on a broad range of sources, and we vary the way we communicate and the different sort of emotions that we communicate with. Now that takes growth for us as preachers to be able to do that. But again, connect with people to a full range of emotions. And again, about our content, connect with the imagination. Using language that connects with the senses or the imagination is helpful for reaching the emotions. I've noticed personally that using visual communication often connects with people in a deeper way exactly for this reason. And it's hard then, for example, to teach a book like Romans because you don't get much visual information, right? Whereas some other texts are much easier because it's leaning into metaphor. And so people can more naturally connect with the emotions over Jesus teaching about the vine and the branches than Paul talking about the relationship of Israel to the church, that sort of thing. Get the idea? So you get the idea of the kind of visual connection. So connect with the imagination. Fourthly, use the power of story or illustrations to connect with the emotions. Illustrations are powerful. They help people, people in an illustration, they take from it whatever applies to them. They place themselves in the illustration. We do this with stories all the time, where quite often, if someone has a favorite movie or something, it says something about them. And it's interesting to kind of go, well, which Friends character do you like most, right? So you get the idea. There's power in story and illustrations to connect with the emotions. I didn't number these. Fifthly, choose illustrations that connect with the lives of those listening. Sometimes a less dramatic illustration might be best for connecting to the emotions of the people that are listening. Now, this is interesting because often we're drawn to illustrations that are as dramatic as possible, because they're interesting and engaging. And that it's important to be interesting and engaging, sure. But sometimes the most powerful illustration isn't the most dramatic. It's the one people relate to most. And then they will be even more engaged. Okay? And so, yeah, and then because they can connect with it, they naturally can feel the emotions that come with it, right? Use application throughout the sermon. Often a temptation for us is to save all the application for the end. If you do that, and you find that you naturally do that, make sure you've prepared enough in advance so that when you've saved all the application for the end, you can go back and look at your sermon and realize that you've done that, and you can load it earlier into the sermon. You can adjust your sermon, because it's much better to have application throughout. That often lends itself to a much more emotional connection, because it's challenging people in regard to how they live throughout the sermon, okay? And then thinking about our connection with people. So 7th, connect with your hearers. Do they know you? Is there a connection? Do they, I once we did a thing and we invited an Orthodox priest to come and talk about prayer on a course that I was helping teach, okay? And the thing I found really interesting about this is he had an hour to speak, and as I'm sitting there, he took about a half an hour to go around the room of like 30 or 40 people that we had and just go and get the names of each person and to learn something about each of them. And like even just jot it down. Okay, Malk. And he'd write it down. And he'd go to the next person. And he did that the entire way around. And I thought, have you not prepared anything? Right? He spent like a half an hour doing this. What was interesting to me is he got through that half an hour, and then he taught for like a half an hour, so like not nearly what he was asked to do. And people connected with it really profoundly. And it was because they felt like they were being cared for. They felt like they were known. That was really interesting to me. I would never have the guts to sort of go around the room and do what he did, and yet, very interesting that. So connect with your hearers. Another thing that has to do with connecting with people, have compassion for where people are at. Okay, have compassion for where people are at. Care for their emotional state, it matters. Sometimes there can be people sometimes you might be working with a teenager or something like that, and you think, boy, this teenager's emotional every week, but what they're experiencing is genuine and important. And so it's important that we care for where they're at. It matters. Have a soft heart for people. Picture a broad range of listeners. Pray into their situations. Pray over your sermon while thinking about the people that will hear it. Develop a pastoral heart toward your hearers. And so if you can have compassion for where they're at, you're going to more naturally be able to connect with them as you speak. Then finally, in the kind of connection with people, share how the content connects with your own life, right? Now this sometimes takes time, because sometimes we think we've prepared the sermon, we haven't really processed it for ourselves yet. And it's important that we do that. And sometimes the most powerful illustrations we have in a sermon come from us doing exactly that and realizing how it connects with us. And if it connects with us, then we're going to more naturally share and connect with it on an emotional level as we share, right? And so, but sharing how it connects with our own life means that we're able to be transparent, means that our emotions are conveyed. We should share personally, but not too much. There's something to be wise with on this. I think if people are listening to you and they feel like this is somehow a self-help session, right? Which at first we could think that's what people want. You don't want to go too far. Right? And so it shouldn't be self-serving, okay? But sharing personally, again, can be incredibly powerful for connecting with the emotions of others as we preach. And then finally, in our communication, vary your tone to suit your content. Now, again, sometimes what we can fall into is we can fall into as preachers, we can fall into having only one tone, as it were. We need to be able to develop the way we communicate such that it can communicate all the different things and range of emotion that we want to communicate. Now, I realize that's hard if we were in like a Pentecostal church where they just shout the whole time. But interesting that when you're in like a lot of people will go into a church where they shout the whole time. Doesn't bother me, but for a lot of people to go in there, what do they feel? Anxious. God hates me, right?
Yeah.
Like these are the sort of things that they feel because of the tone of the preacher. Okay, and then 11th in communication, let your nonverbal communication suit your content. Okay, so nonverbal, your arms, your face, reacting, trying to be natural in what you do. A bad example of this, but I was once in a kind of training session that was from someone that was, her job was to train BBC presenters, okay? And I was like an intern, I'm like 20 years old or something like that. And we had to do like a short little preaching bit in front of this lady so she could evaluate us in front of everybody, right? And I did my little bit, and what she noticed is something that's natural about the way I use my voice. She noticed that at significant moments, I go a little bit deeper with my voice, like that, right? And she went, that's fantastic, because then people feel like they can trust you because they trust people with deeper voices. And that thought, I have tried to avoid my entire ministry because we're not about manipulating people, right? And so what I want for you is for your nonverbal to be natural and to suit what you're doing, to be genuine to who you are. And so your body language, your everything should connect naturally with what you're sharing and with who you are. And don't go beyond it. Right? Don't be, but there you go. And then finally, be emotionally aware as you preach. Now, it connects with EQ and that sort of thing, but it's worth restating. And so be emotionally aware as you preach. Timothy Keller had a thing that he would say, and it was, don't pass the pliable moment. Okay? Don't pass the pliable moment. And what he means by that is that sometimes he would find in a sermon that there's a moment where people are connecting with what you're saying, and they're sensitive in that moment to what God's doing. And so if you find a pliable moment, don't pass it. Settle in that moment for a moment, and let God speak into that moment. And so, but you can only do that if you're emotionally aware enough to recognize what's happening in the people as they're listening to you. Okay? So that's some real quick things, kind of like a top 12 as it were, in your groups real quick. Just, is there one of those that really stand out to you and why? Go for it.